This week's Ofsted report on the alleged Trojan horse takeover by Muslim fundamentalists of certain primary and secondary schools in Birmingham caused widespread alarm that children in secular state schools have been given a faith-based education which does not adhere to modern values and freedoms. Today, David Cameron said, "We're sending out a worrying message. If you're completely intolerant of others, we will still tolerate you." And this has allowed extremism of both the violent and non-violent kind to flourish. Well, every British citizen has freedom of faith. We all have freedom of speech as well. And today of all days, the 799th anniversary of the signing of the Magna Carta. We should remember it gave everyone the freedom to go about their business, subject to the laws of the land. So being British requires us to tolerate the ideas and actions of others that we might personally find objectionable, unless they're breaking the law. Schools should reflect the areas in which they are operating and the communities which they are serving. And if you have a community which is 95% Muslim, surely that should be the focus of the school. That sounds like a pretty Govian idea, doesn't it?
Well, put aside what Govian ideas are. I'm a secularist. I believe in religious neutral politics. I believe that despite a school being 98% Christian, 98% Muslim, which Parkview was, if it's a state school in a secular country such as Britain, then it mustn't be endorsing any form of religion. What's been going on is people have been mixing, and not just wider society, Muslims themselves have been mixing two issues: social conservatism, and it's no one's business how religiously conservative anyone else is, and that's not extremism. But when you try and impose religious conservatism on any public secular institution, the imposition of that is what's extremism, and that's what's being taken, that's what's being objected to here.
Disgusting things about, stoning people and death for apostates. He wasn't saying that in the school, was he? And you're a liberal, and you should... He wasn't talking about those things in the school. He was doing a general lecture on religion. So as a liberal, you should support his right to do that, shouldn't you?
Right, so
Are you a liberal?
Yes, and I support the legal right for him to speak, even if I disagree with those views. Just as if he was saying racist or homophobic or any form of bigotry. If he's speaking in this way, he has a legal right to do so. That doesn't mean that I tolerate it in civil society. It means I challenge it. Just as I would challenge racism, just as I would challenge homophobia or anti-Semitism, I will challenge a Muslim who's calling for women to be stoned to death.
I think the problem really is to do with the fact that this government and the government before it, in fact, has allowed schools to develop a much more independent ethos. And in fact, that allows academies and free schools to give governors a much greater say in how schools are run, in the ethos, in even how the curriculum is defined to some extent. So in doing so, it is effectively saying to communities, you can define your local ethos according to your own views. But then when it doesn't like the way in which communities form their own ethos, form their own
That's what I meant by the sort of Govian principles.
It is absolutely Govian principles.
Gove, for all his ills, has continued something that's been going on for decades in Britain, and that is there's an underlying law that says every school should have an act of worship. Every school child should have an act of worship. And I think that is nonsense. I completely agree with Majid that a secular approach to education is what...
like in France.
It is what's needed.
The British
but there are schools... If you go to local...
By whom is it needed? You mean that's what you want?
No, if you go to local...
There are, as it happens, quite a lot of conservative Christians in this country who object to the way...
There absolutely are people...
Let Peter finish, I'll come right back to you.
Who object to the way...
Wait, let Peter make his point, and then I will come back to you.
Thank you.
In good order.
Who object to the way in which Christianity has been stripped out of the state school system, despite the fact that it is supposed to be in the system following the 1944 Education Act. It's a legal requirement, and secularists in the education system quietly, and as far as I'm concerned, unlawfully, have removed Christianity from our schools. And we are, as a result, a spiritual desert as a country in which any kind of conservative religious opinion is constantly sneered at by people such as this gentleman as being extremist or otherwise unacceptable. Extremist is a non-word. It means nothing. It means opinion currently unfashionable. If you wish to discuss whether something is right or wrong, discuss that.
If you said to people, and it comes back to the British values thing as well, if you said to people until very recently, what is Britain, what are British values, you'd have got a fairly clear reply along the lines of, a Protestant Christian country, we have institutions of church and state and monarchy and so on, which represent the country. As one of the results of mass immigration of recent decades, there has been a substantial change in the country. All sorts of good things have come from that, and some negatives have. But one of the things that has come from it is this confusion about what it is we are. We want to be open and tolerant, we want people to be able to practice their faiths, we want people to be able to express themselves and live the lives they want to live. What we're finding it very hard to do at the moment, and I mean the French secular example has already come up, is to work out where our lines are drawn as a nation, because they're not clear at the moment.
It's impossible to draw those lines, isn't it?
It may prove impossible. It may be that we do something like the French state did. And
what are British values? Well, you said at the beginning, Nikki, today is the 799th anniversary of the signing of Magna Carta. You could do a lot worse than the spare, terse inscription that appears on the Magna Carta memorial in Runnymede: freedom under law. If you wanted to distill British values into one phrase, and in that phrase is incorporated all the things that through the years made this country a better place to live than the authoritarian alternative.
They're universal.
It implies you tolerate those views. Tolerating those views is not the same as teaching them in school.
Absolutely.
But we need to
Every
remember-
child born in this country, wherever his or her parents came from, is the heir to that same birthright that began with the Great Charter 800 years ago.
Is that something that we should fight for, the democratically achieved aspiration to and reality of liberalism?
It's fascinating the way all these British values merchants are so coy about the real basis of the liberty which we enjoy, which is the particular form of Protestant Christianity which this country adopted, which created in people the strength of conscience, the self-restraint, the belief very strongly that law should be above power because law derives ultimately from God. That is what actually makes this country what it is, but they won't talk about that because many of them are not Christians, many of them are active secularists, and many of them are nominal Christians, and they don't really believe these things. That's what made us what we are and made us the kind of country that we are. And to try and generalize this into some kind of human rights blancmange is to make a fundamental mistake about how it came about and what we would need to defend.
And what's
if
the
we
next
wished-
step?
But I'm not-
if we wished to preserve it. The interesting thing is I don't think a lot of the people, the loudest noises who go on about this, actually do particularly wish to preserve it, because many of them are allied with the principal political lobby which has undermined it most of all, which is the lobby which has been in favour of open borders, mass immigration and multiculturalism, which has made it so difficult to sustain this country as it was.
Ajmal and Miriam have just
The phrase that appears in the Great Charter, the law of the land. Not the King's law, not God's law, but a law that was immanent in the people and the territory. That was the genius of this country. That was our unique achievement, and that's been our greatest export, our supreme contribution to the happiness of mankind. The idea that the law is above the government, the biggest guy in the country doesn't get to tell other people what to do. He is bound by something bigger than him, and that is not a divine book. It's not a prelate or a prince. It's the law inherent in all of us as a common good.
Not a single person present at Runnymede 799 years ago today did not believe in the Christian God or believe that law derived from God.
That's nonsense.
I think there is a...
I'd just like to say thank you to Peter for making the comment of a spiritual desert. We are sitting here right now in Brighton, reputedly being the most godless city in England. We have one of the highest
most godless city.
Yeah, in England, apart from Barnsley. We have one of the highest rates, this is important what I'm going to say, we have one of the highest rates of young people's suicide also.
Is that because it's godless?
I don't know. I'm just telling you some facts, because you mentioned the word allegedly.
Yeah.
And if we're debating allegedly, we ought to look where our feet are right now. Because when two people in a family are having a row, the children suffer. And when two neighbours are having a row, the street suffers. And when the street is having a row, the whole community suffers. And what we are looking at is an elephant in the room. If we keep focusing and talking about Muslims in Birmingham, we are missing the point that children on our own doorsteps are dying, are suffering from mental illness, and it is poverty that's at the root cause of this.
Okay.
And I know the media are looking to sell more newspapers, and how exciting is it to keep commenting on what one person has said that's going to be talking about something that everybody disagrees with.
Godless city, Kevin Fry, very quickly.
Because the question today is, should we be tolerant of intolerance? And I doubt if anybody would hold their hand up and say, yes, generally we should be tolerant of intolerance. We shouldn't, but there's certain levels that we shouldn't go beyond. There's the law of the land, but we set levels as well that we say, cultural levels, that we say, culturally, we won't go beyond that. We don't need a law. We don't need a good book. We don't need a priest or a priestess to tell us.
Listen,
I am prepared to say that we should tolerate intolerance. I believe that freedom of speech and thought are so valuable that we should defend them at all costs against all enemies. And that if you can't defend the freedom of speech and thought of people with whom you profoundly disagree, then it is no freedom.
But this debate splits into two.
There's a very important point about all this use of the word extremism in this discussion of these schools. We're constantly told that they are practicing extremism, and the suggestion is then made that this extremism will lead on to the commission of terrorist acts by people who've been taught extremism. This seems to me to be very dangerous for freedom of thought and speech. Absolutely. Many of the ideas which I hold, which frankly when my parents held them were commonplace in this country, but when I hold them are now deemed to be eccentric and outrageous by a lot of people, are increasingly classified as extremism by the mainstream. How long is it before the classification of somebody's ideas as extremism leads? How long is it before this, let me finish the point, if I may. I'm clearly about to finish it, so if you interrupt me now, you stop me doing so. How long is it before the classification of such ideas as extremism leads to restrictions on freedom of speech? I don't think it's very long. I think we should be very careful about the way in which we approach these things. I disagree immensely with a lot of what Muslims think and say. I think that there are many disputes which I have with them, many criticisms I have of their faith, but I think they should be free to express them, not least so that we can know what they are.
For me, faith leaders should teach what they think is right, and that's what they should teach. And schools should teach critical faculties which allow us to distinguish, between solid arguments and unsubstantiated arguments. And that's it. Those are the divisions. Those are the lines.
And that's the extremism. When we talk about extremism...
What's extremism?
Extremism is saying this is what you must think and this is the truth.
What I'm trying to...
Teach and avoid. And actually what's given us our freedom and our flourishing is our Christian heritage, is the backdrop of our Christian faith. To believe in nothing, to believe in existentialism,
But what about, can't we believe in freedom?
Yes,
can't we believe in democracy?
those ideals come from a Christian backdrop.
But ancient Greeks believed in democracy.
That's what served our next. That's actually
and one of the things about this is, and I think it's just the reaction to Andrea's comments, a good example of that. Nobody, it seems, is very keen on admitting where, I mean, I speak as a secularist, but nobody's very keen on admitting the Christian origin of some of these things, and I think we have to be frank about that. We can't write our heritage out or pretend it was something else, and just this attempt to sort of encompass everybody in the new values. I mean, sometimes it's all freedom, good, openness, great tolerance. Yes, it's all fine. There is a risk, however, in this, and it comes back to the thing about always highlighting gay marriage and other things. Again, something I'm supportive of. But there is a risk in this that we build up this new value system on extremely wide ground, because it's ground we want to be as wide as possible to encompass everyone. But it might also be ground that's very shallow. And I would suggest that some of the things we're talking about, if you identify your country solely on some of the lines we're discussing at the moment, it could yet prove to be, and this comes back to the point the lady in the back made, it could prove to be too shallow for some people, and I think that's something we have to think about.
Well, Peter, column today, you described this, I mean, I said nailing jelly to a wall, this finding a definition of Britishness. You described it as squelchy. It's impossible to define. What is Britishness to you?
It is impossible to define. You can only define it by the way in which it's been destroyed.
So what does Mr. Cameron mean? What's he talking about?
He doesn't know what he means. He's simply talking for political advantage. The difficulty that these people have is that the nation-state, which I very much support, is the largest unit in which it's possible to be effectively unselfish. We had that. Now that we don't necessarily share either a religion or a language or a belief in certain customs and laws, we don't have it. It's a regrettable change that's overtaken this country, but one which is obviously irreversible. How we work out how to live with our new neighbours in peace and harmony is going to be very difficult. I don't think it's going to be British. I think we've lost that. It's going to be something else. We can mourn its loss, but to pretend that we can recreate it by speeches...
I think British values...